Hello and welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking your time out on this beautiful Friday and joining us here at Accelerate in our first webinar series for our Salesforce team. My name is Kayla Dow. I run the Salesforce channel here at Accelerate, and I have Shazad Kokar here, who runs our Salesforce practice. And we're so excited about this webinar series that we are starting for our Salesforce team at Accelerate. Shazad, you've been in this industry for so long, and I always hear that this is all you do besides raising your children. Can you please talk to us a little bit about your experience before we get started in this very important use case that we've done?
Sure. Yeah, so hello and welcome everybody. I had a little bit of a teaser of this webinar in the video that we did from Automation Week a couple of days ago. But yeah, I've been working with Salesforce for obviously a very long time, particularly within healthcare and life sciences. And RPA is not something that most people connect with Salesforce deployments, but I think having been in the RPA space for a while and then doing a lot of Salesforce, there were some unique instances where the combination it really is delivering phenomenal results for customers. So I'm excited to talk about this. Of course, there's many other use cases, but I want to explicitly target the RPA-based EMR integrations. Of course, we talk about API-based integrations and some other use cases as well. I'll touch upon those, but I think that's the focus of the conversation today. So let's do it.
Okay, great. So today we're going to talk about this very important use case that we helped a diabetes healthcare organization, right, to provide better patient care at a scalable system with multiple EMRs. We use RPA to leverage Health Cloud. Shazad, can you tell me a little bit about how you were able to come up with a solution for this client? They came to you during COVID. They needed to find a way to provide better patient care at a quicker response time. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about this use case, please?
Yeah, if with permission, I would just want to take another step back and just talk about where the concept of RPA for Salesforce comes around, right? Like Salesforce innately just has a phenomenal automation engine on the inside of Salesforce, right? So when it comes to RPA, a lot of these use cases, including the one we're discussing today, are on the periphery, if I may, right? They help us make Health Cloud or Salesforce within the HLS, right? Healthcare and life science space. It helps us make Salesforce sticky. It helps us get our clientele leverage their investment that they make in Salesforce, right? A lot of EMRs are not really built for white glove customer experience. They're transactional in nature. It takes a long time to make updates. They don't have some of the newer slick marketing components like texting, right? Scheduling across multiple systems, or sending out reminders and all the fun stuff that modern patients they expect, right? The modern consumer of healthcare services expects these services to be delivered with that white glove experience, and that's where Salesforce comes in, right? And the RPA services that we build, especially when we are able to bring in patient demographic data or appointment data or clinical notes, it really helps us deliver better care, resulting in better patient and provider outcomes, right, for the customer. But the step back that I was going to take was, a few years ago, as you guys know, I was formerly at UiPath. I was the head of Salesforce at UiPath. Before that, I used to run a Salesforce practice for another Salesforce partner, and we had deployed Health Cloud for this customer way back when. So they had reached out to me after spending some time in RPA, at UiPath, and they reached out and they said, "Listen, we have our Health Cloud deployment, and we love using Health Cloud for referral management." That's what they were using it for. But we really want to do some care management, follow-up appointments, reminders, reschedules for that matter. We want to be able to do that across the board, from data coming in from the EMR. But this EMR has no API. And the request at the time from the EMR business was to spend about $500,000 just to expose the API, right? So expensive, long, a year plus long project, yeah. And so we said, hey, let's write a bot. right? And so that's where the idea kind of got generated. And I'll hold off on the rest of the story. A lot of stuff happened between now and this particular use case. But coming back to this particular use case, this was really a question of scale. With unprecedented nurses and doctors quitting, leaving, the kind of volume of work that was put on their shoulders right during COVID. So scale was on top of everyone's mind, especially folks that are clinical operations folks. So a lot of people that are responsible for delivering better care at scale at an affordable cost, right? This question was posed to them: how can we see more patients with the staff that we have, right? And so that's where this particular customer, so they do diabetes care management, right? In particular for expectant mothers, right? And so um, it's key that a timeliness of response is really important for them. And so, this involved looking at data. So a typical response for a patient was as the patient calls in, right? So they have nutritionists on staff, they have diabetes researchers on staff, certified health coaches, endocrinologists, basically, education specialists. So kind of they have teams of folks to help these folks, help the patients kind of go through their journey. As you know, the risk of diabetes is a lot higher for expectant moms. So it's critical that these are responded to in a timely manner. We get to as many patients as possible. So the average time was somewhere between 8 to 12 minutes in responding to a customer, i.e. the patient. And if you bring up, the little our webinar icon that we set up, if you look at the design itself, right? Thank you. If you notice, right, what's happening there is your nutritionist or your nurse, right, or your depending on who's needed, right, your healthcare professional, they're sitting and looking at Health Cloud. And before this solution, when the call would come in, this person would have to go and look at the primary care EMR, then they have to go and look at the diabetes specialist EMR, then they have to go look at a lab. It doesn't have to be a lab, there's glucose, monitors, there's insulin pumps, there's all sorts of monitoring devices that data would have to be read from, right? And all of them have separate interfaces. And so one by one, as you can imagine, if you sequence going into these systems and getting that information, it could take a while, right?
Right.
While somebody's listening to elevator music saying, hey, should I take this medication or not? Or should I eat this or not? And so what the end result was now, as somebody called in, as a patient called in, post-solution, we would detect their phone numbers, right? So Salesforce knows this person is calling, this is their number. We have the MRN numbers, right? So your medical record number for each of these EMRs, for instance, or devices. And so we would spawn off multiple processes in parallel. So you have one request going to the primary EMR, for instance, second to her lab work numbers, third into the diabetes specialist. And so within about 90 seconds or 2 minutes or so, you have a full profile that's sitting in a Health Cloud patient record now, right? And so let's say it's a nutritionist, instead of having to wait 10 minutes, within 2 minutes or 2.5 minutes on average, they're not actually talking to the patient. And the most amazing thing is, with the same amount of staff for the business, you can now serve up to 4 times more patients, right? Which means better outcomes for folks that otherwise may have to wait a very long time to get input. Maybe they eat something that they're not supposed to. So that was kind of the end result. We'll get into the details of what processes and whatnot, but that in a nutshell is what we were able to achieve with this integration.
Can you kind of talk about like who is behind Health Cloud, the screen, like who is getting this information in real time from these 3 different EMRs that they're able to make a decision for the patient that's coming in?
Yeah, so I mean, so to the client, so our customer, they basically have a diabetes care management platform, right? So they recruit both clinicians. So like I said, they could be endocrinologists, they could be diabetes researchers, they could be like certified health coaches, care management around, or education folks, nutritionists, anyone that helps this patient population, basically, right? And they're on staff. There's this business, they have these folks on staff. And so they are the ones that are consuming Health Cloud, so to speak, right? And of course, there's management that are looking at, so the clinical operations folks that are looking at, okay, how's my team performing? What is my average time to respond to a patient? what is the quality of care that is being delivered. So we have built some dashboards and some reports within Health Cloud to say, okay, here was the before and after. This is how long it was taking for you to respond. Here's the quality of responses. Health Cloud also has natively survey capability built, right? So we knew we were going to do well. We knew the patients were going to love this service, so we set up some surveys. And we got some stellar responses. There's HEDIS and star ratings, that go around like how a particular provider, for instance, is doing, and so it really helped this particular business scale their business, make sure they're profitable, but most importantly, improve the patient outcomes, which is see a lot more patients a lot faster and see a much larger population.
That's just amazing. I mean, that's great how technology and healthcare is coming together now to actually create better experiences for patients, right? Quicker response time. I mean, back in the day, I remember sitting in a waiting room for 2 hours sometimes, but now it's just a lot quicker. And I'm just amazed day by day how technology has grown.
You have a healthcare background, so you can relate. You work in a
Oh yeah,
hospital.
so back then when I used to do credentialing, I used to manually write down, line by line information for our physicians. I used to do the same information over and over and over because, we're placing them in, short-term contracts at different hospitals, and we needed to fill out the same thing over and over. But now we can automate it, and for a bot to be able to do that for us, that's just amazing.
Yeah, so I mean, and again, we're talking about EMR integration, but I'll quickly mention, there's within the RPA kind of ecosystem, right? There's the whole IDP and now IDP with GPT. So the training times are getting lower, and without getting too nerdy geeky into the tech side of these things, we have customers, right, where they were getting, let's say, one particular customer that I'm thinking of, they get about 75,000 referrals a month, and they're all faxes. So they had an army of people just typing these into Health Cloud, right? So all of their VOB, so their verification of benefits processes would happen first in Health Cloud, and then they would decide whether they were going to take the patient or not. And if yes, okay, let's go ahead and create them in the EMR, which would be a similar process to this RPA-based integration that we did for this customer. But that would happen after that first initial intake, right? There's RPA processes for just kind of doing that first level of intake or triaging ourselves, right? A bot can do that, right? So looking at what the request came into a hospital, for instance, and say, oh, these are requests for like medical records, okay, put it in one queue, or these are requests for lab work, okay, put it in another queue. Even that first level of triaging, it takes a lot of load off of kind of the front end of folks that are the brunt of, during COVID in particular. That were the brunt force of sitting and trying to resolve and get patients treated to the right place at in a quick manner. So yeah, there's other solutions around in the periphery, but I think one of the key advantages of RPA is time to deploy. One of the common questions that I get asked is how does it differ, for instance, from like classic API-based integrations, right? You get those requests, especially from Salesforce channel, quite a bit, right? Like, what's the delta between those two? Because there is the MuleSoft solution, of course. We also do Founder-based API integrations, for example. And so, not that one is better than the other. It really depends on the situation. Sometimes we build RPA-based integrations. Sometimes we do API. Sometimes we do a combination of the two, right? It really depends on the situation. If you like, I can get into those details. But really, RPA-based integrations open doors to get into EMR data that previously were, for most economic reasons, were not plausible, and also the amount of time that it takes, to do API-based integration. Sometimes RPA is a better option.
Wow, that's great. That's great to know that there are options out there, and also, there are, an option for any size business, right? Small business to enterprise. So we'd be happy to, answer any questions regarding that. But just to take a little step back from our use case, can you walk us through step by step from a high level perspective, what each bot is assigned to do for this organization?
Sure. So yeah, there's a couple of things, right? The primary use case for this particular company is just to get the most recent clinical note to make sure, because every time the bot is executed and we go and grab the most recent clinical note from the EMR, that history is in Salesforce now, right? So if somebody called in yesterday, it's unlikely that their history has changed significantly. So you're already up to date in Salesforce, right? But if somebody called last month, yeah, it makes sense for the bots to be executed one more time. Go grab the most recent note, bring that into Sales Cloud, Health Cloud in this case. But on that point, we could do this with sales and service too, right? They're all HIPAA compliant. But they can make to be HIPAA compliant. It doesn't need to be Health Cloud. But yeah, so that's the primary use case, is to get the most recent, clinical note. So sometimes, let's say that the primary care or other specialist doctors, they prescribe something that's information that we need to know. So we are also periodically then looking at any prescriptions that were added to a particular patient, and how that could potentially impact their care from a diabetes, from an overall care management perspective. So we're looking at that. We also are then the third use case. Once the first two kind of ran successfully, the third use case was appointments. So if we knew that the patient was going to go and see a particular doctor at a particular time, we could send them, as in, the provider of the care management business, they could actually send them some documentation, articles, some information on what to ask, what to expect, that sort of thing. So really getting ahead of the process, as opposed to answering at a time where they have something in front of them and they're like, should I do this or should I not do this, right? So it really kind of improves that level of care, because we're able to see schedules, we're able to see prescription information, and we have all the clinical notes all in one place in Health Cloud. And actually, I'll say one more thing. Even though these are all RPA use cases, what it really does is, now that we have that data in Salesforce, I kind of briefly mentioned this up front, right? That white glove, state-of-the-art CRM capability, that's where Health Cloud, right, or sales and service, that's where it shines, because we can trigger off workflow items based on events that are being recorded that are coming from the EMR, right? So we know, let's say if it's a family member that we need to remind, hey, this person is not taking their meds, for instance, or hey, they have an appointment coming up and they're going to need help because of XYZ, or we know something was prescribed to them and they also may need that other thing, right? That can be sent out to them automatically from the customer from an outreach perspective. Text-based reminders, right? There's digital engagement. We always, you're able to kind of communicate. So it opens up this kind of what I'm calling the white glove patient experience, because all the key data points are now with us within Health Cloud. And that's really the power of getting the integration done, having those data points, and delivering better care.
That's amazing. So just to summarize in a less technical way from what you just said, these bots, they're messengers, right? That will communicate between the systems to give the care management team the information that they need. They don't store any information. So from a compliance and governance perspective, it's in compliance. Of course, that's something we all think about living in the United States.
Yes.
Live HIPAA forever. So briefly touch base on that.
Sure. Yeah, and Canada has similar requirements, right? But yeah, I mean, all of these technologies, I mean, EMRs are HIPAA compliant. Health Cloud is HIPAA compliant. The RPA products, they don't actually store anything. So, but all of the data, it does move over a secure socket layer, right? So it's all over HTTPS. So from a compliance perspective, it's all, it's a kosher process end to end. We are moving data, and really RPA without APIs. Again, just to get a little bit technical, you really are mimicking human behavior. So imagine someone like an actual nurse, let's say, for example, like you were doing, right? Way back when you were working at the hospital, looking at documents line by line, typical use case. And we actually have a video on this on the Accelerate website, where you can see a referral, for instance, moving from Health Cloud directly right into, I believe in that case, it's a physical therapy EMR, it's RPT. But the process is the same for all EMRs. The process is, once you're ready to accept the patient, you just basically click a button, which can be automated. And then you can we've slowed down the process where you can actually watch the bot open up the EMR, log in, use the information that was passed to the EMR from the Salesforce bot, right? The patient name, patient address, some sort of diagnosis code, referring doctor, maybe perhaps a rendering physician if that's already been assigned. And it's creating all the entries in the EMR. Right, the EMR creates a referral ID, some call it a case ID, and then there's a patient ID, which are EMR specific markers. and we take those and we store them in Health Cloud for any future connection, right, or data integration that needs to happen between these two systems. But that's kind of the high level process. It's actually not complicated.
Wow. Okay. So if an organization comes to you, they're having trouble syncing the data across several EMRs. For this
Hmm.
particular use case, what was the reason this customer came to you and said, I need a design for this particular problem that we have? And why did you go the RPA route as to API route?
Great question. Okay. So in this case, right, in the long term, they might turn this into like an API integration or the long run, right? Typically, API-based integrations take a lot longer,
Mm-hmm.
right, and they're a lot more expensive to do. These folks, they needed something quick, and they didn't want to, or didn't have the budget for a large, long-term API-based integration process. So that's where RPA made a lot more sense for them. Also, the volume of transactions that they were doing, they're not. If you're not doing, hundreds of thousands of transactions, in a short span of time, RPA may be a better choice, a lot more economical. It's predictable. Error handling is not that complicated. And now that we've done a whole bunch of these across many EMRs, so there's kind of your top 20 that are used a lot more, like the Allscripts and the NextGens and the Athenas of the world, right? So some particular industries have a lot more specific ones, like in recovery centers, we see a lot of KIPUs. In physical therapy, I mentioned WebPT, for example. There's the Epics, right, of the world, but those, if you can afford an Epic, you can afford API-based integrations, right? That's kind of, again, the general comprehension with everyone that's in the industry. But for a lot of the commercial business, growth business, those are sometimes not an option. And so coming back to this particular company, in that growth commercial space, RPA was the solution to go. And we can talk pricing a little bit, but generally speaking, RPA is a better option economically and specifically in the time to deploy for the commercial and growth business itself. Now, I will mention this. Sometimes RPA and API are done together. So let's say we end up doing, setting up a 2-year long, integration API-led, integration-based strategy for a customer, because they have 12 EMRs, because they've acquired all these businesses over time. But then let's say they may be implementing Epic, but then they have all these other EMRs. What do we do for the next 2 years, right? Should we wait to deliver that care, or should we put in kind of almost like a stopgap, right, for the next couple of years with these RPA-based integration bots? And that's what we do for some customers, is just kind of use RPA in conjunction with the API integration processes. So it really depends on what your overall vision is and what the volume of this data exchange is, where you are economically, and how quickly do we need to scale. And we kind of take all of that in the equation, and whatever's best for customer, that's what we recommend to implement.
Right, because in healthcare, right, people are constantly need to be cared for. Like, it just never stops. So there cannot be downtime in this industry, right? We have to take into account that people are always sick, always hurt. So we have to make sure that the technology is continuing to work with the organization.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So when these systems are to be deployed, right, we take into account, like you're saying, care cannot stop. We'll try to do stuff between Friday night and Saturdays and whatnot, right? But of course, the human body doesn't know that it is the weekend. And, somebody breaks their leg, they break their leg, right? So yeah, there is a method to kind of deploying these out. We do try to keep the downtimes to a minimum. Sometimes there are parallel processes that we have to build. There's a lot of UAT, QA, of course, that we do. There's a compliance component to it. But in general, RPA-based EMR integrations tend to be deployed a lot faster. They tend to cost a lot less, right? And once you start to experience what Health Cloud or Salesforce in general can do in terms of bringing the state of the art to the patient experience, there's always more, not less.
I want to reiterate that this solution is not just for Health Cloud, correct? This
Correct.
can work with Sales Cloud as well. And can you talk about other CRMs, or other products of Salesforce that it will work with?
Yeah, I mean, so there is actually no dependency, right? Like Salesforce has a pretty comprehensive open API. So if you look at this diagram, for instance, right, RP is sitting in the middle. The bot will do the human behavior mimicking components with the EMR, right? But once it grabs the data, let's say I just created a patient, and now I need to go and record the patient ID or the case ID in Salesforce. I'm still calling it the Salesforce API to record that, right? And so to record that API call, it's the same call because Salesforce is that kind of metadata-based platform, right? So whether it's sales or service or health cloud, our process is not changing a whole lot. Of course, health cloud gives you a whole lot more. So for instance, there's an out-of-the-box referral object, right? I don't have to create referrals directly. So I may address that information coming back one way versus if this was Sales Cloud, I might create a record type on the opportunity object, call it referral, and then store it in there. But the fundamentals don't change across the board for Salesforce itself. Now, sometimes some of the newer stuff that I'm starting to see is moving data for like Tableau-based reporting. Again, there's APIs available to go grab data and whatnot. But generally speaking, sales, service, and health cloud, the larger process doesn't change, the same process.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you talk about the anatomy of a project like this? When this specific organization came to you, how did you kind of just, kind of take it all in and then figure out a time frame for, of
Sure.
course, 3 EMRs? How do you kind of pick and choose what to do first and at a high level, like what is most important to do first versus, last?
Yeah, I mean, the right answer is that it depends, but kind of the key data point that I would say 90% of the providers or customers start with is just patient demographics, right? That's where your patients are, and we need to have contact information of those patients just to interact with them, just to send them reminders, just to do kind of the core scheduling with them. So that's, most often than not, that's kind of the first use case. But in terms of an anatomy of a project, right? An average bot like this, takes maybe 4 to 8 weeks on average, if I can say 6 weeks to deploy. So these are not long projects, right? And so in terms of time commitment, we typically need someone on the provider side or the client side, right? That is the subject matter expert. So we need someone to say, let's say we're creating patients in the EMR. We need someone to show us, hey, this is how we create a patient. Here are the 8 or 5 or 10 things that are important to us in our process. And while the general process is the same, like I mentioned, patient information, address, contact information, referring provider, some sort of diagnoses, right? This insurance information, kind of those data elements are very similar. How they're stored, their relationships to each other could differ EMR to EMR. So kind of the starting point is us needing this subject matter expert, someone that understands the clinical operations from that particular use case side. Once we know that, then we're doing 95% of the work, right? There's a little bit that's the onus of kind of delivering that business intelligence, because every provider runs some of the process in their own way. So there's a little bit of time that we need up front, maybe a couple hours, and then maybe for testing, right? As we are delivering this back to them, saying, hey, is this doing what you think it was going to do? And then every 2 weeks, of course, we have, using Agile from a delivery methodology perspective, we're doing check-ins, right, for each sprint. So they have access to what's actually being built, in real time, and we can get feedback from them. So, in this particular case, it was 3 to 4 bots. And so each bot, let's say if it takes about 6 weeks, the bots can be built in parallel, maybe give it a couple of more weeks of testing and then kind of bring everything together. So on average, something like this is somewhere around 10 weeks to 12 weeks sort of a project. Like I said, most of the heavy lifting is done by us at Accelerate. We do need, like I said, subject matter expertise, and then UAT is important, right, toward the end. There's always exceptions that happen, because most of the times when you're creating patients, you don't think about what if someone doesn't has X, or what if someone doesn't have Y, right? What if somebody has 2 insurances? For this particular kind of a patient, if the referring physician said this, then we go and create this other, we upload this other form over here. That kind of stuff can happen post-production also. So there's some support that happens post-production, but that's kind of the anatomy of the project, right? It's a little bit of time, but mostly what we need from the clients are their subject matters. experts that know how the process itself works.
Mhm.
And then the last component is for the, like I said, it's most the outreach that we get is mostly from someone that's responsible for operations, right? How do I deliver more care, better care, same amount of nurses, right? My budget's staying the same, but I need to deliver care for more people and faster. And so there's one of the key components of delivering this is reporting on how is care improving, right, for the person responsible for operations.
So, as you know, some healthcare organizations, they may not have their own IT team. How does
Mm.
Accelerate stay in collaboration with the client or healthcare org to continue to offer the support after the project goes live?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for some of the smaller customers, we do have like the pod structure, right? Again, that comes from the RPA world of Accelerate. They're the top company, within the RPA space. With us kind of coming in and bringing in Salesforce expertise, I think we're leveraging that same pod style delivery capability, so we can. The actual support structure is going to change. It varies. Like you said, what if they don't have any IT? Well, okay,
Mhm.
well that we can set up the virtual servers. We can monitor them. We have this phenomenal resource called the ROC, right? The Robotics Operations Center that we serve from 3 different countries on the planet. So that's a piece of art in its own right. But yeah, we can kind of deliver that care or that support depending on the level of expertise and time. Sometimes businesses do have, or providers do have the IT capability, but they're already fully committed to doing other things, right?
Right.
And because this is a new ability, sometimes we have a transition period where we may support, let's say the bots go live, July, right? And then we may support them through December while we train their staff on some of this support doing internally. They might pick up some part of that support, January of the next year, and then slowly they can kind of run the whole thing on their own. And we only get called when they either have to do another bot or they decide to go the API route, right? We Accelerate now has 40 people in the MuleSoft team. So if they end up going a different route, if we have to alter the strategy, so we come in and kind of do those strategic projects. But absolutely, we can provide support as and when needed during and after the project.
So, just to summarize, Accelerate always has an expert on hand as needed, and we have support in different time zones to support our clients that are, in the West Coast or East Coast.
Yes. I mean the wonderful world of offshoring. That's right, both from an economics perspective and availability perspective. It's an add-on right now that we have RPA capability also added that into that economic and time skill perspective that helps clients.
Now, Shazad, does RPA solution work with all EMRs?
I mean, the short answer is yes, right? It does work with all EMRs. Most of the EMRs that we work with are SaaS, right? So they're web-based. So in general, and again, it's agnostic. I'll make a quick comment. These RPA integrations are platform agnostic, right? So whether you are a UiPath shop or Automation Anywhere for that matter, right? Or we do open bots as well. The actual process wouldn't change, right? So if you already have some sort of an RPA platform within your organization, we can just leverage what you already have. If you don't have one, we've done a lot of these studies. We can kind of make a recommendation as to which one makes sense for you guys, right? So that's one thing, right? This process itself is agnostic of the RPA platform that you use itself. So yeah, I mean, in general, we work with all sorts of EMRs. If the EMR ends up being Windows based or desktop based, for instance, sometimes that can pose a challenge. But most of these platforms are actually web based, so the process is very similar.
Yeah, and I remember you telling me about this specific use case that you worked with an EMR that did not have API access, and you were able to
Oh,
figure out a solution to be able to take the data and send it to Salesforce.
sure.
Please share a little bit about that. That's a really cool project.
Yeah. So I mean, that's where the idea actually came about, right? And it was a couple of years ago. The EMR is called HealthWise, Wise with a Y. So we question the wisdom in that name itself, but yeah, that was That was the EMR. Yeah, I mean they had a web-based interface, and the API was turning out to be a project, and so we just kind of tested it out, in the beginning, and it worked really, really well. The client was really happy. They only had two of their clinical teams in Salesforce, and once we were able to bring over patient demographics and some clinical data using a bot-based solution, right, integrated with Health Cloud, they actually added 50 more folks to their Health Cloud instance, because now these folks did not need to be within the clinical system, right? Only the physicians needed to be in the clinical system. So yeah, it was a wild success, and the rest is history. But that's where the idea of using RPA for EMRs came about. It really was a need that needed to be addressed.
And like it. Sorry.
Are there a lot of questions
No,
coming?
the question that, we all want to know is how much does something like this cost? Of course, that
Ah,
is, the one main concern when, a company wants to start a major project like this, like what are we looking at?
yeah, no, it's a good question. So I can tell you, I mean, from a bot development perspective, right? I just pick one use case, and I think the rest of it would be similar. So let's just say all you need to do is create patients, right? Whether it's from Salesforce or EMR or the other way around, because we actually have one customer for which we implemented so intelligent document processing, right?
Mhm.
Uh, so for that use case, the document actually comes in as a fax. We convert the document into a digital record, and then we actually directly add it to the EMR. And from the EMR, we actually move it over to Salesforce. So whether we do it this way or that way being directly entering into Salesforce, right? The process is very similar. So let's just say it's one bot, and all you're doing is creating patients, right? Depending on the complexity, it's the average cost to build a bot is somewhere between 8K to 12K. That's kind of the average price. Yeah, it's not expensive.
No.
And then, the ongoing service cost will depend upon the RPA vendor of your choice, right? So like I mentioned, UiPath or Automation Anywhere or OpenBots for that matter, um, whatever, you've negotiated with the actual RPA vendor, and we can help with that, right? I mean, we have a partnership with UiPath, for instance, in particular, but we have partnerships kind of across the board, so we can help negotiate what that vendor agreement or service agreement looks like for you. But that price will vary depending on the vendor that you choose. But the actual build out of the cost is not expensive at all.
Yeah, and I think some organizations need to keep in mind is that sometimes pricing is not, it should not be what determines which route you take. Sometimes you don't need API access because of the volume of data that you need to be transported in and out of systems. RPA
Yes.
may be the better route, but then if you're dealing with a massive amount of data, then API eventually will be the better solution.
Mhm. Yes.
So we're at 40 minutes now. We would love to take some questions. If anybody who's here with us today would like to answer some questions, so Shazad and I can answer the best that we can. We'd love to answer them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to learn on the subject itself. A lot of people uh, that are familiar with RPA may not be familiar with Salesforce. And a lot of folks that are familiar with Salesforce may not be familiar with RPA. What I've learned um, in my last couple of years being in the space, there's that the Venn diagram across those two communities is actually rather small, and so sometimes I have to spend there's some education in how the two of them could work together.
Especially
Uh,
in the healthcare world, like all this new tech terminology, like what is RPA? What does it stand for? Robotic process automation. What is API? API means something different in the healthcare industry, as you know,
yeah.
and pharmaceutical companies, they use API for something else. So, it's great to have these sessions to be able to, kind of connect and talk healthcare as well as tech, but in simpler terms so that we can all just digest it all, because we're in a world where technology is ever changing. The past 6 months, like the products have, completely, enhanced themselves.
Transform.
Oh, we have a question. Mr. Safri, For some EMR login sessions are limited. So is there any way to scale such EMR automation using RPA?
So the way that, well, first of all, it depends, right? I mean, what are the actual limitations themselves? Um, when you're typically doing simulation, right? If I can use this term, when you simulate an actual worker's behavior, typically the way RPA is set up is you set up a virtual machine, and the virtual machine will behave like an actual user, right? Now the actual user may have other things that they're doing, right? But if you dedicate this virtual machine to executing, right, you give this virtual user one user ID, right, or one session in this questions case, that session can go on for the entire day to do the actual work itself, which is different than a human being that may be doing other things, right? So we can take a look at that particular scenario and see what we can do to kind of minimize the impact on kind of session management in general. But typically, that's kind of the difference is, right, is if you give the bot one session, the bot can work continuously to move data back and forth.
So does each bot have its own role, or can you use one bot for different roles in this automation process?
Yeah, no, I mean, you can do multiple processes, right? So a bot, let's say, um, you think of it as like a transaction, right? So let's say that after the initial, we've been talking about just kind of the initial setup of the patients, right? So one transaction, you were on the VM, the bot went created the patient. Okay, great. Now, when you actually have patients whose, let's say, appointments need to be brought back, right? You could have a second step in the process that says, okay, go and create the patient, or if the patient already exists, for instance, go and get their appointments and bring those appointments back, right? So that's technically a second part of the transaction, like a 1A and 1B. 1C could be, oh, the patient already exists. Not only do I want you to bring back the appointments, I want you to bring back their prescriptions. I want you to bring back their clinical notes. So they could be 1A, B, C, and D. So you can absolutely kind of layer in the work. Of course, what you have to keep in mind is every time you add another step, right, it's more time. And so
Makes sense.
the way we scale that typically is we add a second virtual machine or a third virtual machine, depending on what needs to happen, right? But that's a discussion on scale and deployment planning with the RPA tech team, right? But yeah, you can absolutely do multiple transactions in a single bot itself.
Just to kind of digest from a real-time perspective, how fast are we talking these bots are working?
I mean, the creation of the patient on average, like I said, it's somewhere between a 2 to 3 minute process. That's kind of the average that I've seen.
Okay.
So it's not magic, of course. Again, it's not API, so it's not immediate. But again, if the SLA, right, if your service level agreement between having this data in Health Cloud once it's generated in the EMR, for most customers, if your service level agreement is, a couple of minutes, this is prime, right? And so you as a business, as head of operations or person responsible for connecting the two systems, that's a decision that you have to make. Is that going down to 5 seconds or whatever, 10 seconds or an API-based integration response time? Is that worth the amount of time and money that I have to spend to go in the API? And sometimes the answer is yes, it is, and sometimes the answer is no, it's not, or maybe it's true, but only 2 years from now, right? And so that's where you have to kind of weigh your options and make the best decision for both the business and the patient outcome.
So we have another question that came in from a different outlet. They are asking, do you guys implement Salesforce Shield?
Oh, good question. Yeah, not directly relevant to the EMR, but yeah, of course we implement Shield. So Shield is Salesforce's product that basically it does multiple things, but one of the key reasons why clients implement it is encryption at rest, right? So of course, all data that gets sent to Salesforce is encrypted while it's being transferred over. But if you have a specific HIPAA requirement where it needs to be encrypted while stored, right, and then yes, we would implement Shield. Again, Shield is the actual work is it's not a complicated setup, but it is very involved in terms of kind of understanding the requirements, what fields, what objects, who has access to what, that sort of thing. And then it could, there's some testing is involved in kind of setting up Shield. The other key things that people look for from Shield is like who's accessing system, what are they doing when they access the system, at what time should they be accessing the system. So Shield is kind of set up more on the compliance side of things, but I think it's a great question because it is within the realm of how do you set up Health Cloud, how do you bring in data from an EMR into Health Cloud, and then how do you make sure that all of the compliance, right, is actually adhered to in the solution from end to end. So yeah, great question.
So Salesforce Shield is something that you would add on with Health Cloud,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. So, we work with, I mean, that's what you do for a living, right? You work with your account executives at Salesforce to figure out, what do you need? How much of it do you need? And then we kind of do the implementation side of these things. But yeah, I mean, typical Health Cloud with EMR. So if we're doing a brand new setup, right, we would do kind of the core Health Cloud configuration, setting up patient profiles, see if there's care plans to be set up referral management. There's a few different things. If it's a medical device company, or if it's on the pharmacy side, there's something else. Some other things that we look at fulfillment and those kind of processes. But then comes the EMR integration, right, which is okay. Now we're bringing the data, and then depending on what your compliance requirements are, if you do need to encrypt this data, then we would implement Shield on top of all of that.
I hope that answered your question. And we have some more time for some more questions if anybody still has any. We'll give it like a minute or so, and if not, we'll just do our closing remarks and we'll end the session a little short.
Yeah, while we wait for see if there's any more questions, I just want to mention briefly, Automation Week, one of the things that everyone was interested in was the whole combining of AI now with Salesforce. Salesforce has announced, right, AI Cloud with pricing, and one of the coolest things that they announced was this whole bring your own LLM model, right, which I think is super exciting because it doesn't limit clients to just one model. Everyone most commonly knows the GPT model, but Salesforce has 3 of their own models now that are going to be available, and it's bring your own model. So I'm looking forward to setting up some of those use cases. It's still R&D in terms of implementation use cases, right? In beta, it's used by some customers, but that's some of the newer exciting stuff, right? You can imagine RPA-based processes feeding the engine itself to get some, cool, smart, real-time answers back.
Yeah, I know our team, we're super pumped regarding all the new features that all the Salesforce products are starting to launch. So yeah, stay tuned and see, where it takes us in our future projects. So we don't have any more questions. We're just going to close out with some remarks here. We want to thank everybody for joining our very first webinar here at Accelerate. My name is Kayla Dow. I am the channel manager here for our Salesforce team. And this is Shazad Kokar. He runs our Salesforce practice. Please reach out via LinkedIn, email address if you have it. We'd love to connect with you all regarding any RPA, EMR integration Salesforce projects, or just reach out in general. We'd love to connect. Shazad?
Yeah, no, I hope this was useful and educational for everybody. Really, my purpose of doing the webinar was to talk about the art of possible and how the RP and the Salesforce work kind of comes together within healthcare and life sciences space. So if this was useful for you, it would make me very happy. Thank you for spending the time with us. And yeah, I look forward to hearing from you. And if you have any feedback, please reach out. Thank you.
Yes. All right. Have a good day. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye.
Bye, everybody.